It's a beautiful morning in Seattle, and today we're talking about injury, the management of injury when it happens, and the recovery of it. And for that discussion, I am delighted to have with us Heidi Armstrong, the founder of Injured Athletes Toolbox. So great, well, Heidi, thanks for being here. We've got
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, we've got a good discussion today on fitness, injury, and life in general. I think all of us are interested in sports, in feeling good, and not having the downsides of what can be part of life, which is injury. And I wanted to have this talk with Heidi today because she's an amazing person. You are a recovering athlete, and you've got a whole story to tell us. But also, you've done some research, and you've made it your life and your profession to help athletes. So, tell us a little bit about you.
So I guess we'll start with how this all started. Yeah. All right. So a long time ago, back when Jesus was a baby, I had a crash on a mountain bike, and I was a high-level mountain bike racer at the time, and I did not deal with it well. So I went from being this very easygoing, level-headed person to becoming pretty angry and insufferable all the time. Because if I didn't have the bike, I felt like I didn't have an identity. So this injury then became an existential crisis. And my best friend had an intervention one day and just said, "You're not dealing with this well. You need to find another way to deal with this." And so the first thing I did was I found a psychotherapist and found a new physical therapist. And these people helped me out of this existential crisis, this really dark time in my life. And then once they helped me out, it took probably 7-8 months of everyday concerted mental training to get out of this hole. But they started then referring their clients to me. And so I think when we get injured, the first thing we think is, I'm the only one dealing with this. Like, poor me, why did this happen? I'm the only one dealing with this. And so, for instance, my PT would have a patient that was feeling this way, and he would call me and say, I have this patient, and I don't think he needs psychotherapy at this point, but he needs to talk to someone else that's been in the hole, that knows the way out. Can I give him your number? And so this went on informally for more than a decade. I had another career at the time, and then in 2010, I had another severe knee injury. This time I fractured it, ended up with a chronic complication, and couldn't go back to my job, which involved a lot of standing. And so I was also at the time working with several injured athletes at once. And so I thought, okay, the universe, or whatever you want to call it, is telling me something. So I need to pay attention, and maybe I make this my career. And I started that I have a very scientific mind, and I thought I don't want to start a business without a lot of research. So I spent a year doing research with about 200 injured athletes, all different ages, different sports, different levels within the sports. And I wanted to find out two things. What are the words that they're using to describe what they're going through, like the challenges that they're facing? And then the ones that come through it. We all know these people that they've had a significant life challenge or an injury or an illness, and they come through it, and they seem to have more resilience and more grace and more self-compassion, and they will explain their injury as being difficult or of course painful and expensive, but they'll also say, I'm very thankful that this happened to me because it made me a better athlete, it made me a better human being. I wanted to find out what behaviors those people had in common. So I took the result of my research and my experience with being injured, which is probably, more than a decade now, like probably 12 years of being injured, and turned that into my business, which is Injured Athletes Toolbox. So
okay, that's great. So now you have this website, and it's called Injured Athletes Toolbox.
Yes.
Where you basically have some resources for athletes, and then they can find you, and then they can work with you one-on-one.
Yes. So the way that I wanted to do this was to put all the resources on the website for people who feel like they can direct themselves through the process of mental training and getting out of this hole of despair. But also, if they can't do that, they can always work with me, because sometimes we need some accountability and motivation and some more structure.
Yeah. The philosopher Nietzsche said, amor fati, love your fate.
Yes.
And I think it's really about, you don't choose always what happens, but you can choose how you respond. And I think there's a lot of what you've been seeing on the reaction and what happens next, right?
Yes.
On these athletes.
Yes.
So in your case, I was watching you walk throughout this day, and you walk perfectly. You've had an injury where people that have what you've had can barely walk sometimes. Tell us what this injury was and the craziness of living with it the rest of your life.
Yeah, so my initial injury, I fractured my knee. So ACL tears are a common injury. And so instead of my ACL tearing, the ligament actually stayed intact, but it pulled off the top of my tibia or my shin bone.
ACL stands for?
Anterior cruciate ligament.
Okay.
So this is the ligament that soccer players and basketball players and football players often tear.
Okay.
And so it just so happened that the physics of I crashed cross country skiing. So the physics of this injury I ended up with a bone fracture instead of a ligament tear. And it's this extremely rare fracture because the ligament is the weak link, not the bone, right?
Yeah.
But that fracture and the subsequent bleeding in the joint from the fracture led to a chronic scarring condition called arthrofibrosis. And arthro means joint and fibrosis means scar. So this can happen in any joint in the body, but it most commonly happens in knees.
Okay. And then as a result, you have to basically move. You were showing you have to move your knee very frequently to avoid the stickiness, or how would you explain
Yes,
this?
so immediately after surgery, so the goal of the surgery is to not clean the scar tissue out of the knee, and that I think that's where a lot of people get into trouble with arthrofibrosis, is they have a surgeon that goes in and they basically hoover all the scar out, but this creates more bleeding, which creates more scar. So it takes a very, very experienced and skilled surgeon with this particular condition to treat it. And so what they go in and do is actually use a tool that cauterizes or cuts and then seals the blood vessels off, and they release the scar. So scar, by definition, connects two types of tissue together that shouldn't be connected. And so you go in and release it, but then once it's released, or separated and it's mobile, then you have to keep it moving in very gentle ways in order for it to not scar again. So my surgeon, Dr. Stedman, told me the knee has a memory, and once it scars, it wants to scar again. And so one of the tools that people use is called a constant passive motion machine. So you lie on your back, it slowly bends and straightens your knee to keep the scar mobile. But moreover, you have to be really careful about loading the joint because the scar grows in response to load. So what a lot of people will do is have surgery, feel great, everything's loose, nothing's tight and connected and pulling. They go out and they live their life. They're loading their joint, the scar comes back. And that's the cycle that people get into. Yeah,
makes sense. We also talked about cross-training and the fact that we have stronger muscles and weaker muscles. And a lot of what you do now is every morning you cross-train, you keep all of your muscles in good shape so that you don't overload. I think you were talking about the overload and the movements, so that you don't have the cascading effect of not walking in the right position.
Yes.
That then has the cascading effect of injuring some other place.
Yes,
right?
Yes. And it's important, I think, also to back up and have people understand that injury is an opportunity to rebuild how we move and how we condition ourselves. So, for instance, I worked with a guy who was a professional soccer player, and he saw this injury as an opportunity to go back and work on all the fundamentals of movement and rebuild and strengthen areas of his body that, because he was playing at a certain level, he never had time to go back and do that. So this rebuilding process of cross-training, moving in different planes, training different areas of his body and small muscle groups, eventually allowed him to become a better soccer player. Okay. So this is a huge area of opportunity. Instead of people saying, oh, I can't go run, for instance. Well, you can't run, but there are so many other things you can do. You can do Pilates lying on your back. You can do yoga. You can work with your physical therapist or physician and see what kinds of movement are safe, begin to move in other ways, begin to cross-train, and that will make you a stronger, more whole athlete.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I got injured also on my leg when I was training for the second marathon. And I was ramping miles week by week, and then I developed shin splints. Very painful. Yeah. Went to a sports doctor. He wasn't sure if it was a stress fracture or not. Could do some MRI, but we didn't go there. And when I didn't run, I had no pain. But as soon as I ran, within 60 seconds, it was very painful. And after 2 weeks, I thought, well, I haven't had any pain. Maybe I can restart. And after 2 weeks, after 1 minute, the pain came back. And it took me 7 weeks to recover.
Yes.
And I think you have a metaphor for that you've seen that very often, that when we get injured, we think that we're healed, but it takes a lot longer for the body to fully recover.
Yes. And I think we have to back up and look at our motivations for moving. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, we move because it's healthy and we're supposed to, and it helps us maintain our mental sanity and our physical fitness. Some people move because they're addicted to it, and they have to move in order to not come completely unhinged mentally. Yeah. This is usually rooted in something else that happened to them, some kind of trauma in the past. Like people literally running away from their trauma.
Yeah. We run to something, but we also run away from something. Yeah.
Yes, right. So when we get injured, we sit, we have this time. And so all of these things that we can run away from and process through exercise, they all of a sudden hit us like a ton of bricks, and it becomes too much. Yeah. So then this forces us to make poor decisions about beginning to move again as we start to feel better. And this is when we get in this cycle where if you look at your injury as a fire, what we often do is we let the fire die down and it becomes embers, and the embers can still catch fire again, right? So this is what you did. You started to feel better. You went out and ran again and started to hurt. So the fire had died down to embers, but the second you added gasoline on it or the running, you started to hurt again.
Exactly.
And so what we have to do is let the fire die down until it's ashes. And this took you 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can go back and exercise and be confident that the fire is not going to reignite. Yeah. And we often don't have the patience to spend the proper amount of time to let the fire die down completely. So then people get in this cycle that extends the time they're injured. It extends the suffering, the frustration, the expense, it extends everything.
Yeah. And people don't realize it. I guess we have to experience it to realize the damage or the difficulty of it. Yeah. In that case, I had the marathon date in October, and I thought, well, I can't afford 7 weeks of rest, which eventually I had to, right? But the date is just something in our mind that we say, okay, this is the day of the race. So you back up all your training to 16 weeks before, and then something happens in the middle and you freak out, and 2 weeks later you want to restart.
Yeah. I think what we also often don't realize is that rest is a time for rebuilding, and we will often come back stronger from an injury even though there's been a period of rest.
It's true, yeah. Most athletes are at the top. They take some time at the end of the year to really recover, rebuild the body. Yeah, fantastic. Tell us a little bit also about the, so as I hear you speak, really there's a physical part, and then there's the emotional part, the psychological part, how we live with it, pain management. You were talking to us about these two nervous systems, and how that helps.
Yeah. So we have, our nervous system is divided into two parts. There's the parasympathetic part and then the sympathetic part.
Okay.
So the sympathetic part is, you have a hungry tiger chasing you, you look, you realize there's danger, you run. Your heart rate increases, your respiratory rate increases, you might feel nauseous, your palms might get sweaty, you start shaking. People call this fight or flight, right? We can look at it as the gas pedal of your nervous system. Okay. And it's survival. It's what happens when we're stressed out. That's the part of our nervous system that's engaged. Then there's the parasympathetic nervous system, which also just so happens to control involuntary things like digestion, heart rate, things like that. And that's the calming part of our nervous system. And so when we're functioning at homeostasis, or just a very balanced level, these two nervous systems work in cooperation with each other. But life gets in the way, work, stress, kids, injury, and then we start to lean toward the sympathetic nervous system taking over. And I look at it as our nervous system begins to work against us instead of, or play against us instead of us playing our nervous system.
Because the stress adds inflammation, it's detrimental.
Yes, and it also, we have lots of studies that say that your body follows your mind when you're healing from illness or injury. And so if you are thinking negatively, if you're stressed out, you're not going to heal as well, possibly as completely or as quickly as if your nervous system and your mind is balanced. And so we have studies that have shown us things that we can do to engage our parasympathetic nervous system. The thing that I find with my clients is that they become resistant to trying something different because they're so stressed out that stress becomes a mountain to climb. And they simply feel like they can't climb it. So things that we know that help engage the parasympathetic nervous system, yoga, meditation, and then also cold water. So if you get into cold water long enough to begin to shiver and then get out and you can wrap yourself in a blanket, you'll feel you'll be shivering, you'll feel cold.
So if I have a stressful day, a cold shower is a good idea.
Yeah, but cold, get in there long enough that you start shivering, not just
a cold bath.
Yeah, but dump some ice in the bathtub and just get in, okay. Right? Or you go swim in Lake Washington right now, right? And then once the shiver breaks, there's this intense calm that comes over you, and that's your parasympathetic nervous system kicking in. And so when we're injured, the more that we can engage that part of our nervous system, the more we give our body the environment it needs to heal physically. Okay. And people so often forget that when you're injured, you have this extra time on your hands. You're not out training. You're not, even if you're not training for something, you're not out doing the thing you love. Mm-hmm. And so what are you doing? You're at home perseverating. You feel mentally imbalanced. You're angry. You're frustrated. Your spouse probably finds you difficult to live with. Mm-hmm. You have a really short fuse. And the way to balance all those things out is to begin to engage your parasympathetic nervous system by the things that I mentioned, but also I define creativity as doing anything you don't normally do in your daily life. And so it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're painting a picture or drawing, but using your brain in other ways will also begin to engage your parasympathetic nervous system. So examples would be cooking or learning some kind of a new skill, like maybe you want to do metalwork or woodwork, so you sign up for a class somewhere. And when people begin to engage that part of their nervous system after climbing this mountain of resistance to get there, they realize, oh wow, when I'm doing this, I don't notice I have pain anymore. I don't notice, I had freedom from pain while I was doing this thing, or I began to feel hopeful, or...
So it's a reduction in stress level.
Yes.
And then it's also turning your attention to something else.
Yeah. And it's a vehicle to reduce pain and allow your body to heal. Yeah. So I think engaging that part of our nervous system every day when we're stressed out by life or injured or whatever is vital to recovery.
Okay. So in 2012, you did a study and you looked at the number of athletes and you found these patterns, these recipes for success. Tell us a little bit about what you saw in this group that you talked to.
These people that were able to forge ahead mentally and stay positive and heal and be thankful for the challenge that they faced and how it shaped them. Basically, they took the injury and said, this is an opportunity I have to examine and re-examine my life and basically prune, right? Get rid of the branches that are not allowing this tree of my life to grow bigger. And then that allows the sun to reach the branches that really need to grow. So they getting rid of old habits, bad relationships, things like this.
Yeah. Some tough calls sometimes, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So these people told me that they did not use the word should or could because they thought that was that denigrated and didn't allow themselves to move forward. It kept them looking in the past and comparing themselves to what they used to be able to do. So an example would be, I should be able to walk 2 miles by now, or I should be able to run right now. Well, the fact is, you can't right now in your recovery. Maybe you had some setbacks or something like that, but it doesn't matter what you should be able to do. It matters what you can do, and then what you can do the next day, and what you can do the next day. And then they never use the word could. Like, I could ride this ledge 2 years ago, because then that led them down this path of comparison, which is very, very toxic.
I see.
And they were willing to ask for help. And though it wasn't reflexive or even comfortable to begin with, they realized that in order to allow this injury to heal, for instance, you have an ACL reconstruction and you're not supposed to be bearing weight for a while. That means that I can't take the dog for a walk. I can't cook. I can't do dishes. I can't do these things. And so I need to ask for help to allow myself to heal. And I had this problem for a while, and I actually got over it because a friend of mine sat me down and she said, "You like helping other people, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I love helping my friends." And she said, "Well, do you realize that when you don't accept help and you don't ask for help from your friends, you're stealing their joy, just like the joy you get in helping other people?" And nobody had ever put it to me that way. And I thought, yeah, this is, in life, we have to take and we have to give. And we're really good at giving, but we're pretty terrible at taking.
Yeah. Sometimes we feel like we're going to be proven wrong, or there's some sense of shame, maybe.
Yeah, shame, burden, nuisance. These are the words that people use. Mm-hmm. I don't want to put somebody out, all of these things. These people also had somebody in their life that told them the truth, even when it was hard to hear, and they believed them and they acted on it. And I think that's something that everybody needs in their life. A
very close friend that has some knowledge about the subject. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or just an outside view, because it becomes any stress or injury puts us in this bottle. And when you're in the bottle, you can't read the label. So who's going to read it for you? Who do you trust to come to you and say, like my best friend did, this is not working anymore and you need to find another way to deal with this. And they realize that this person, the friend that's intervening, that's saying something to them, number one, that they love them. They care about the person who's injured. So when my best friend said that to me, the first thing I thought was, that really took a lot of guts for her to say that. I mean, she looked me right in the eye and said, "You can't do this anymore." And I think our natural reflexive response is to get defensive, but I didn't. I just thought, wow, she's gutsy. And then I thought, she loves me. She must be saying this for a reason. She notices something that I don't see, and so I better do something about it. And people that were successful getting through their injury had people in their life that could come to them and be honest.
Fantastic. Companies do 360 feedback, right? The peers kind of give you feedback.
Right.
It's a little bit similar. It's uncomfortable, in a way. But if the people around us really give us the true view of what they see as what we're doing good, where we could be doing better, we can take it to heart as well.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying here is that the principles around injury apply to other domains also, that it's not just like stress about the injury, but stress in life in general.
Right. Yeah. I think I should also mention that my one of my favorite podcasts, Two Guys on Your Head, these two psychologists, talked about this concept of people taking input from the outside. And when you're injured, just like a lot of other things in life, you have kids, everybody tells you how you should raise your kids. When you're injured, everybody tells you what they think you should do and not do. And it's important to take the input from people who know what they're talking about and people who care about you, right? And this one person you trust that you listen to they know what they're talking about, and they care about you. So you take what they're saying to heart, but some of these other things you have to be able to dismiss too.
Very good, very good. Well, I hope that it's been incredibly helpful for me personally to talk to you, and I hope that the rest of us here can find something from Heidi to learn from. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and we only have one life. Enjoy it. Don't over stress. But if you do stress, think about what she told us. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.